Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on leadership in the balance. I think some of you joined us last week, so it's great to see you again. Hope you found that webinar valuable. If you weren't with us last week, you can go to our YouTube page and find last week's webinar, which gave an overview of Leadership 4.0. We're going to touch on that overview again today. We've also got upcoming webinars on the other three elements of Leadership 4.0, which I'll be sending you a link to later, so you can register for those if you haven't already. But welcome to the webinar. Delighted to have you here. Just a really top line overview. My name's Joe Nagel. I'm Innovation Director at a company called the Innovation Beehive. We work with companies to accelerate the potential of ideas through innovation projects and innovation training. We accelerate the potential of culture through culture projects, both articulating people's desired culture and also activating that culture in their organization. And we actually use the innovation process to do that. And obviously we accelerate the potential of leaders, which is why you're all here today. So I won't tell you too much about how we do that, because you're going to find out on the webinar today. Just some of the wide variety of clients that we work with. And I don't just share this with you to make my head a little bigger with ego. I share this with you because I want you to know that the learning that we have taken as an organization that is fed into Leadership 4.0 is taken from a huge range of sectors, of businesses, of organizations of different sizes, of different sectors, and with different customer bases, different business models. So these learnings, we actually feel, are universal across different sectors and different organizations. You can see a wonderful person has joined me. That's Angela. So I'll hand over to you, Angela, to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. For those who don't know me, my name's Angela and I'm the People and Innovation Director at the Innovation Beehive. And my specialisms are culture and leadership, which are inextricably entwined. And what we're going to share with you today is what we've learned talking to leaders in all sorts of industries, retail, hospitality, finance, education, public and voluntary sectors. So what we're going to share with you today is relevant to all leaders at any level in any organisation.
Thanks, Angela. So to kick off, I just thought it's always good to reflect on where we've been before we think about too much where we're going. Leadership 4.0 was actually launched back in early March 2020. It was launched at a live event. We had 60 people join us at Google's Academy in Victoria in London. It was a great event. It was the last mass gathering that I went to before the pandemic. And I just want to give an overview of how we came up with Leadership 4.0 and how it's more relevant than ever. So I'm going to start in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see there's someone there with VR goggles on and the world is augmented for them. And that represents for us digital disruption. That is really where the concept of Leadership 4.0 came from. Digital disruption is one of the most powerful forces to generate uncertainty in the world, or so we said before the COVID pandemic hit, and then we discovered that there was a natural force that would be equally as powerful to deliver uncertainty for us. But that's where it came from, this sense of continuous change, continuous transformation, the need to be constantly aware of what's going on around us and to bring our teams with us on the journey towards continual transformation. So that's where Leadership 4.0 came from. But as I say, it's as relevant then as it is now, because we're living in an age of uncertainty. If we move to the top left corner here, COVID-19, we all know the impact that had. I don't need to dwell on it. I don't want to dwell on it. We've had an easing of lockdown, and I'm an optimist, so I'm hoping that's permanent. We shall see. But you can see there's various images here which represent the impact that COVID-19 has had, the way we socialize together. There's people there with masks on having a drink outside. Now, thankfully, we can have a drink inside and have some meals inside. So hope everyone's going to be doing that on the weekend. You can see people joining meetings over Zoom. Again, really a real classic example of how things have changed. I know McKinsey wrote a report in the middle of last year that said that the COVID pandemic has accelerated digital adoption by something like 7 years. So there's been a huge change in the way we all work. There's also been a huge change in the way we engage as consumers with businesses. You know, online shopping has become even more normal and even more prevalent than it was before. And there's a lot of talk that actually that's not something that's going to change dramatically as a result of the pandemic. Yes, there might be a peak now, a spike now of people spending in the high street, but actually the long term is a trend towards digital commerce more and more. And then finally, in the top, in the center there, that is a piece of a glacier falling into the sea, and of course represents climate change. And the reason I talk about climate change is because it's a slow burn, but it's becoming more and more important. And if we are going to solve the problem of climate change, we need to be leaders who can cope with uncertainty. We need to be leaders who can lead when things are needing to change at pace, because let's face it, we need to speed up if we're going to solve that problem. So we are living through dramatically uncertain times. And Angela is going to talk to us a little bit about what we need from our leaders in those uncertain times. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely summary there, Joe, of sort of how the world's just getting more and more unpredictable, and how do we find the direction, which is what people say they most want from leaders, is knowing where are you taking us? If we're going to follow you, where are you heading? And what we found talking to leaders and doing our research is that people want what they always wanted from leaders. So we want clear direction, we want to know where we're heading, we want the support and the resources in order to deliver what we want to deliver. But we also found, as you'll see on the next slide, is 5 things that people said they really wanted from leaders now. And they're the ones that leaders need to dial up in times like this. And the first one, perhaps unsurprisingly, is trust. What we found at the beginning of lockdown was it was really interesting who was finding it hard to work remotely and who wasn't. So those teams that had really built relationships up, and the leaders that had built relationships and really built levels of trust with their teams, were finding it much easier than those that hadn't. Because it's, well, how do I know my people are doing what they're supposed to be doing? Why doesn't my manager trust me? Were conversations that were happening all the time. And then for people that were going into the workplace, it was, am I trusting other people to be doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are they washing their hands to happy birthday? Are they sort of, wearing masks when they're supposed to, and so on? So, that's absolutely something that, people have always wanted to trust their leaders, but something that's just got absolutely heightened in the last 18 months. Now, credibility is an interesting one that, and this has been more of a slow burn, but it's just heightened very recently, where people are sort of challenging people in authority more than they used to. So, a generation ago, people would go to the doctor and trust whatever the doctor told them. Whereas now we're able to, do our own research. We're able to find examples that will contradict something that we always assumed to be true. And people are saying more and more, is the news that I'm reading true? So credibility has really sort of risen up the scale. And again, people want to know that their leaders are credible and that their vision is credible. Compassion. And I sort of hesitated to use this because some people just said connection, but more and more it came across, I need to know that my leader cares about me. Not just cares about, am I doing a good job, or care about my my personal and professional development, but more and more about, I want to be cared for as a human being. Need to know that, they're not just a number. And again, this has come across much more strongly with people's sort of the physical insecurity that we've been feeling, and also the remote working that we've been doing is, do people still remember me? We aren't having the same social conversations that we had before, that would sort of oil the wheels. It's I haven't spoken to my manager for a week. Do they actually know that I still exist? And then stability is a big one. So a lot of people we're talking to, they're having to restructure. A lot of people are furloughed, and people are saying, is my job safe? Is my industry safe? So again, people want to know, what's happening to my job, and what's going to happen to the team. And finally, but still very, very important, is hope. People want to know that there is hope. Joe just talked about, you know, hopes to go to the pub and hopes that this lockdown will end forever. And you know, that's what most people talking that I talk to at the moment say, have you had your vaccine yet? Which one was it? You know, that's what people are talking about. People are just, you know, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And the greatest thing that leaders can give at the moment is hope. So I don't know how well that sort of relates to your experiences, but it's certainly what we found talking to people. And here's our Leadership 4.0, which, as Joe said, we launched sort of 18 months ago. 2 years? I've lost track. I have totally lost track of where we are.
It was about a year and 2 months ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
March 2020.
Is it really? It feels like a lifetime ago. Really strange being up in London with all those people. And yeah, we launched it to help leaders think through, you know, how do we lead people in a time when it's just not clear what the answers are. And we compartmentalized it into 5 key practices. So we said, what is it that leaders do who are really coping extremely well in these uncertain times and really bringing people with them and really succeeding? And what we found was they were just excellent in these 5 key practices. And the first one is leading in head. As you'd expect, it's very much about, you know, the cognitive thinking about what's your strategy, what's your vision, where are you heading, how are you going to get there, looking at resources, doing your customer research, analysing, you know, analysing competition. But also they took it a step further and said, yeah, but what can we learn from elsewhere as well? So it wasn't just about what can I learn from what my industry is doing at the moment, but what can I learn from other industries, and really fascinating stories to share one day with you on that. What we also found they were good at was the leading in heart, so really bringing people with them. So not just, right, I've done all the thinking, we know where we're going, off we go, is really people really believing in them, following their passion, and just, you know, giving their all and following people and really wanting to be with those people, so that when those leaders moved on, other people went with them because, you know, they were literally following their leaders. What we also found was in this talk now of, we talk so much more about resilience and mental health, which, you know, a decade ago just were sort of peripheral. But what we're finding now, and especially in a time when we're all sort of on high alert regarding our physical health, that we found leaders were very good at looking after themselves and looking after their team. So really focused on self-care and role modeling it for their team. Because again, we found some leaders who are very good at supporting their team, but forget to support themselves. So they're very good at getting the balance and supporting their teams and themselves in developing their physical, mental and emotional health. And key to that was we found that these leaders made all 3 of those habits. So the head, the heart and the health. None of it was a tick box exercise. None of it's, well, I've done that. It was, right, how do I get this ingrained so that I'm doing it all the time? And we've been studying a lot in how do you evolve great habits and get rid of the ones that really aren't working. And then finally, what we found was really interesting is the really exceptional leaders that we call, you know, the 4.0 leaders, really understood the difference that they made. You know, on a macro level, what difference am I making? What impact am I having on climate change? You know, what impact am I having on the world, on the organization? But also on a micro level of what difference have I made in that conversation? So really, you know, just weren't wasting their energy or their time, were they, Joe? It was just, you know, what is, don't know how to rephrase it, but it really was, this is the difference that I make. And we called that leading in history.
And I think, you know, fundamentally, but there's more to it, and we'll get to that when in the last webinar in this series. But fundamentally, it is about understanding the purpose behind what we do, and that kind of permeates across all 4 of the other practices. But today, of course, we're focusing on leading in head and leading in heart. And I've got a question for you. For those of you who've been on webinars with us before, you will know that we like interaction and we like hearing from you. So find the chat box. And if you could let us know from Angela's brief description there, and we're going to dig into it in a lot more detail, would you say that you are more leading in head or leading in heart? Because what we're talking about today is how these 2 play together and intermingle, and actually how you're going to need one in some situations more than in the other, but actually it's about having a balance between the 2. So type into the chat box whether you think you're more leading in head or leading in heart, and then maybe say why you've selected that one over the other. So I can see some responses already coming in. I'm more leading in heart. With lots of hearts after it, which is lovely. I think that probably sums up a leading in heart person. More head, more heart. Yeah, the tallies are coming in. Head, heart, head, heart. It's really balanced, actually. This is great. You could make a rhyme out of this. More head, more heart, more head, more heart. Balance of both. But needed to create the right both needed to create the right outcome. Well done. I think our work here is done with that response. Balance of both, absolutely. But we need to do things with passion to engage our customers and employees. So that's the why behind being more leading in heart for this person. Another one, heart, I have a strong feeling preference. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was talking to someone last night about, there's various psychometrics out there. And just in terms of color insights, which is one that one of my clients uses a lot, we were talking about how leading in head. So if anyone uses color insights, this will make sense to you. Leading in head is very much the red and the blue side, and leading in heart is very much the green and the yellow side. And I'm sure that you can map this onto all of the psychs that are out there. Zach, my colleague who's on the webinar today, is an expert on psychometrics. Maybe I should have talked to you before today, Zach, and got your take on that. There you go.
Well, we include it in our modules, actually. Yeah,
absolutely. Because knowing where you come from means that you know where your strengths lie, and then you can leverage those strengths in situations. But you can also leverage those strengths to improve your capability around the leading in heart side. So we're gonna dig deep now into leading in head, and then dig deep into leading in heart. And we're gonna then look a little bit more about how we can boost ourselves in one or the other. So Angela, back to you. Thanks everyone for contributing.
Thank you. And there is no right or wrong, as someone said. The key to it is developing both and using both. But we find it helps to separate them out so that you can think about, which should you be leveraging at the moment, and are you doing it enough of each one? So as we said, leading head is very much about the cognitive thinking and developing the strategy, analyzing data, and so on. And the key things that we found that really differentiated those that were really sort of exceptional in this were those that had a really sort of agile mindset. So it wasn't just about, yes, they were very, intelligent thinkers. It was about just how good they were at sort of being able to to change direction when it was needed, which is something that we've definitely found in the last 18 months. That when the rules are changing all the time, it's kind of right, okay, let's head this, oh no, we need to go this way now. Is how quickly can we change? And I imagine that's been relevant to everybody, because we've certainly found it at Innovation Beehive. Is suddenly it was, but we turn up to people's premises and we get loads of people in a room and make things happen, and suddenly we couldn't do that anymore. So it was right, quickly, how can we deliver what we need to deliver in a different way? And imagine a lot of you have been there this last 18 months. What 4.0 leaders were also really good at was just sifting through the data that they really said, right, which pulse do I need my finger on? There's so much now that's fake news. You look at, right, this is what the experts are saying, and then you realize there are other experts that are actually contradicting them. So what do you know, how do you know what's true, what's relevant for you? And again, these leaders were really great at sifting through the data and saying, right, this is what we need, this is relevant, this is the way we're going to go. The third one there is something that we've found lots of leaders. It's been a big challenge for so many of them the last few months, because the rules have kept changing, because things have kept changing, and they just felt like they're firefighting all the time, and having to just, wait a minute, we set our 5-year plan and now that's gone completely to pot, and just having to deal with the short term. But what 4.0 leaders do is they always keep their eye on the long term as well, and manage to keep that balance between the two. And the fourth one, which some leaders are very good at already, but for others it takes quite a lot of courage to be as transparent as 4.0 leaders are in their decision making. So they're really prepared to show their vulnerability and say, right, this is why I'm making this decision in this way. And they're really good at then consulting the right people at the right time, so that they know they're making the right decision. And when they're just going with their gut, they'll say, this is what I'm doing. When they say, right, we need to be creative here, they know when to be, they need creative solutions. They know when, no, let's go with the tried and tested and so on. But their transparency really kind of built the authenticity in there. And this is what built, trust and credibility with people. And yeah, this is where Joe and I are both going to share our elements of the modules that we particularly like in the Leading in Head module. And for me, if you've ever read Jim Collins' Good to Great, you'll know about the Stockdale Paradox. So it's been around for a while, but suddenly feels very relevant again now. And James Stockdale was a Vice Admiral in the US Navy, and amongst other places, he fought in Vietnam and was a prisoner of war there. But one of his most famous quotes, and his really sort of, famous mindset, is about, you really do need to give people hope. So you must really have faith that you will prevail in the end, that you will get through this, that you will get a good outcome. And this is where, the hope is really important. And what people have said, my leader's just not giving me any hope, is you must give people the hope that there will be a good ending to all this. He said, but at the same time, confront what's real in front of you. So yes, paint this picture of, how wonderful it's going to be, but don't ignore the brutal facts that are right there in front of you. And again, this is where the credibility comes in, is don't say, yeah, we'll be right as rain again in 12 months. If it's going to take longer, it's going to take longer. And again, this is where the transparency and the decision-making is really key. So that's my favorite, is kind of about the credibility and the hope there, Joe.
Absolutely. And just to add to that quote is taken from an interview when he was specifically asked, how did you survive mentally in a prisoner of war camp? And what he actually said before that quote was, well, people who thought that they were going to be home by Christmas and then weren't, and then they thought they were going to be home by Easter and then they weren't, and then they thought they were going to be home by summer and then they weren't. Well, they didn't survive because they couldn't get past the fact that their hope had been dashed. And that's what he meant by the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. And I think it speaks very strongly into balancing the short and the long-term goals of the organization in our context, to say, actually, yes, there are things that need my attention now, but I must never forget that there are things that are going to need my attention in the future. And yes, we are emerging from lockdown now, but I must never forget that it could all come back down again and we could be back into another lockdown. So I need to be prepared for that eventuality. And I think my example from the Leading in Head module is similar, but different. And for me, the reason I wanted to choose this is because when we said what 4.0 leaders are like, we said that they create a clear direction and know where they're going, but that they're also agile and are prepared to change direction. So how can this be? How can they be both? And the answer for me is the OODA Loop. So the OODA Loop is it's another interesting. We've both picked military analogies, Angela.
Yes.
But the OODA Loop comes from the Second World War. Fighter pilots, they would be very agile in the moment, needing to constantly reevaluate the course they were taking, the direction they were taking, because there was literally a killing machine following them that could take them out, or they could take it out, or it could drop bombs over London, or they could take it out before it does. So, they were under extreme pressure in a very serious situation. And they adopted the OODA Loop as a methodology for quick decision making. And I think it's incredibly valuable for our times as leaders. So first off, observation. That's where you start. You start by looking around you, looking at your surroundings, looking at the broader economic environment, looking at the trends, looking at the direction that COVID is taking, for example. You observe all of that. And whilst you're observing, you then orientate yourself so you understand where you sit within this ecosystem of insight and data that you have gathered. And then you decide on a course of action, and then you take action. Really simple. But it's a loop, because as soon as you have taken action, two things will have happened. One, your action will have had an impact on the surroundings that you're in, because you will have changed things, you will have moved, or your action will have caused things around you to move and change. So that's one change that can happen. But the other thing that can happen is your surroundings can change without any action from you. So as soon as you've taken action, you need to then observe again. You need to look around, see the lay of the land now, and then orientate, and then decide, and then act. And then you've acted again, so you go back around the loop again. And this is the methodology that leaders constantly need to take. And in terms of being agile and having a clear direction, just think about this. Imagine you're sailing across, imagine you're planning to sail around the Arctic Circle. So you know where you're going from A to B, you know your point of destination is, let's say, I don't know, Vancouver. I don't even know if that's on the coast, actually. Anyway, so let's say you're going to Vancouver from somewhere in Norway, and you're going around the Arctic Circle. Now, as we know, in the Arctic Circle, there's going to be a lot of icebergs. So you know your course, you know where you're going, but you know that as you go, you're going to have to constantly reorientate. You're going to have to constantly decide, which way am I going to go around this iceberg? Which route am I going to take through this ice field? You're going to have to constantly be thinking, I know where I'm going, but in the immediacy, how do I get there? And I think that's why this OODA Loop and the Stockdale Paradox actually connect, because you're constantly thinking about the long term. You're constantly thinking about where I'm going, but at the same time, you're constantly orientating yourself in the moment. And for me, that kind of exemplifies what it's like to lead in head. But we have a question for you, which connects to the OODA Loop and to the Stockdale Paradox. How do you adapt your decision? How have you been adapting your decisions recently? So think of an example where you've had to change course in some way. Could the OODA Loop have helped? Did you use it? And what we've just told you is actually a manifestation of what you did in the moment? Or could the OODA Loop have helped you maybe make a decision more quickly? Could it have helped you make a better decision? Could it have helped you reorientate multiple times so that you had a clearer course? And maybe communicating about the choices you were making in relation to the OODA Loop, could that have maybe helped with your team when you were making those changes to the plans that you had? So have a think, and feel free to share in the chat box your responses to that question. And Angela, I think can you think of any times recently where we've had to adapt our decisions in the business and maybe use the OODA Loop, or we could have used the OODA Loop?
Got hundreds probably, because it really matches kind of your psychological way of thinking, doesn't it? But I mean, we had a client recently who we had the brief, we agreed what the work was, and it all seemed, very straightforward, what we usually do. But once we'd started, I can't reveal specific examples because of confidentiality, but things kept coming up. They were going, wait a minute, like you said, we know where we want to go, we know what we want to achieve, we know what we want the culture to be, but actually how we're going to get there needs to change. And so we've had to sort of evolve it a lot. I'm doing a spiral in my hand there. Yes, yeah, we had to keep adapting as we went. But it's interesting, when you first shared that with me, I thought, guys, what we do on a micro level as well. So when you're running a workshop, you're always, you've made your plan, this is how it's going to run, this is how much time you're going to spend on each activity. but you're always adapting it as you go, according to who's in the room, what they need, where their energy is, and so on. So it's you know, it's a very natural way of behaving, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
I
sometimes
think
good to be
so.
conscious of it.
I mean, there's an example that I use this as a sort of practice myself consciously because I find it really helpful, which is another reason I chose it from the module. Um, and you know, I'm currently in the process of working with a client to develop a face-to-face intervention for the end of June. So you know, as things stand, I've observed, and as things stand, all restrictions will be cleared by the 21st of June. Now, obviously, that may not happen given the conversations that are coming out of government. So I'm constantly orientating myself and continuing to observe to make sure that actually the conversations that I'm having with the client are appropriate to the moment. So I'm far more on top of the news than I usually am because I find it a bit depressing sometimes. So I'm really aware of what's going on so that we can make decisions that are informed in the moment. And we've agreed that, you know, if things change on the 21st of June, we have a plan B, which involves virtual delivery, but we also have a plan A.5 to mix numbers and letters. Why not? We have a plan A.5, which is actually that we will hold off depending on what we observe in the world. How long are these restrictions going to continue for? If they do, we may hold off and wait so that we can actually have the face-to-face when it's safe to do so again. But we've had some comments coming in on the chat. So I used observe to consider past actions on how I plan my time, and from the past actions, I've moved in a different direction. Perfect example of orientating, adjusting, and then taking action. Self-awareness is the key for observation. Conviction and courage is needed to trust the gut and orientate and decide on a new direction. Action then gives feedback, as that arrow indicates, back to observe. Did I get it right? What do I need to change? I absolutely agree with that. The one thing I would add is that it can sometimes be useful, particularly if you're dialing up leading in head because of the context that you're in, or if you're a more heart-orientated person generally, it can be useful to introduce some data as well as your gut feel, so that when you're orientating yourself, you're not just relying on what your gut tells you, but you're also relying on the data that you've observed from the outside world. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Really good insights there. Angela, let's look into leading in heart.
Let's. So, as I said, this is much more about how you actually engage people. So you've set the direction. You're on your ship, if you like, heading around the Arctic Circle. But how do you really get your crew engaged? How do you get them to really you know, support you in that journey? And again, these are the sort of the distinctions we found with the 4.0 leaders. The first one was their real passion. So when you talk to them about their role, about the organization, about, as I said, what the difference that they made, they just had such a passionate belief. They really understood why they were sailing around the Arctic. And that sort of that passion just helped energize others and gave that sort of belief and that trust and the confidence that you were heading the right way. They also had a high level of self-awareness in terms of their personal values, and they always had their values are very aligned to the work that they did and how they operated as leaders and how they treated other people, and in a way that was it was part you'll find with these 5 H's that they do overlap so much, but where they said they'd learned to do that. They said again, it was a real energizing thing and really good for their mental health, that they'd done jobs before where their values were not aligned and they just felt the conflict and felt the impact on them. But again, with these aligned values, it helped others see their authenticity and say, yeah, I understand who my boss is, what they're about, and they could get behind those values as well. Now, a really key thing was their really deep understanding of people. So deep understanding of their customers and how they operated, deep understanding of their team, deep understanding of their peers, and deep understanding of themselves as well. So what did people need in order to feel motivated? What did people need in order to be influenced to do things in a certain way? And we're just very good at not just understanding individuals, but how dynamics played out, and how to just really how to get the best out of people and the best out of teams. And as a result, they were just excellent at really engaging and energizing their teams, because we didn't just interview leaders, we interviewed their teams as well. And you know, they just talked about just you know, how much they love what they do, and it meant that when times are tough or when things are confusing, they could just really you know, that they were able to use their initiative, they felt empowered, they just had the energy to get over that, and we're there to support each other. And again, leaders can put so much pressure on themselves to be everything to everyone, whereas actually the 4.0 leaders were great at using their teams to support each other too.
Absolutely. And you know, as I was listening to Angela, then I was reflecting that some people might hear what we say about leading in heart and think these are like sort of innate characteristics, you know, like passion, values driven, engaging, deep understanding and empathy. Well, the truth is that they are not innate characteristics. These are characteristics that we can develop. These are skills that we can hone. These are behaviors that we can work on and improve in ourselves. And I want to give you an example. I have a really good friend who is, if he did our leadership scorecard, he would be off the scale in leading in head, as I am in lots of ways. I'm very much a head orientated person by nature. So if I was to answer the questions in our scorecard, I would probably come out at leading in head. Now, the thing is, we can always adapt ourselves to different situations and to different requirements of our team. And this is why Leadership 4.0, this is why we developed Leadership 4.0, to help people to understand what the best leaders do holistically across every practice, and then work on them. So you identify where your strengths lie, identify where you're less strong, and then build up those strengths in your weaker, well, I don't like using the word weaker actually, but in your less strong practices, build them up and work on them. And I'm just going to share one tool that we share on the Leading in Heart module of the Leadership 4.0 course. This is a tool called the lily pond analogy. And we also use this a lot when we're talking about organizational culture. And what this helps to do is, particularly when you're thinking about, you know, the deep understanding of people and aligning the values of your team to the values of the organization, or to your own values, and understanding their values so that you can work well together. Well, this is the tool to use for that. And it's a visualization of what it's really like inside someone and inside an organization. So you have the surface level, you have the top of the lily pond, you have the cultural artifacts and patterns of behavior, which is a very grand way of saying the things that you can see. Okay, so if you think about your organization, people will behave towards each other in a certain way, and that'll be visible. They'll talk to each other in a certain way. You may well have an articulated set of values that come up on your screensaver or are on the wall of the office, or you know, you learn about in induction, or you have training programs on, or your leaders talk about, or they're in your signature, etc. Those are the cultural artifacts that are the visible representation of something that's going on under the surface. And one of the problems with culture articulation is that sometimes they're not actually a representation of what's going on under the surface. They're just words that have been thought up from somewhere and aren't actually based on what's going on underneath. And that's when culture doesn't work. And that's why culture sometimes has a bad reputation in organizations, because it doesn't actually reflect what's going on. And what is going on under the surface? Well, first of all, you have cultural mindset. Now, these are effectively when people come together. What happens when you get different people coming together in your organization? What are the dynamics at play? And sometimes these manifest in terms of patterns of behavior, but other times they're feelings that people have. There's sometimes are hidden hierarchies of authority and power that aren't necessarily presented on an organizational chart. These are the cultural mindsets that we're talking about. And they are influenced by the emotional ground and the motivational roots. And those are the motivational roots and the emotional ground of each individual in your organization. Each individual in your organization is effectively one of these lilies in the lily pond analogy, and they all mix together in the cultural mindsets piece in the pond. And then what you have at the top, at the surface level, the whole of the pond becomes your organization. All of those lily ponds represent the culture. All of those lily pads represent the culture in your organization. But to truly understand people, to truly deeply understand people, you need to get right down to those emotional grounds and the motivational roots. And how do you do that? Well, you do it in a number of ways. You can ask people and have deep conversations with people. We often talk about the difference between a check up, which is when you check how well people are doing at a particular task or at their job more generally. And then there's a check in. And this is when you connect with people on a human level, when you seek to understand more about them and seek to offer them something of yourself. So being a vulnerable leader, which is really important in Leadership 4.0, to show vulnerability in order to receive vulnerability back. And in doing that, you build up a picture of what is the emotional motivation of the people in your team. And I find that analogy so helpful because it just reminds us as leaders that we need to go deeper than what we see. And we also need to recognize that we ourselves are deeper than what we see. We have cultural artifacts and patterns of behavior. We behave in a certain way. We have cultural mindsets, the way we engage with our colleagues in the senior leadership team or at the leadership level that we're at, or the way we engage with people in our teams. That's our cultural mindset. And we have our own emotional ground. We have our own motivation for doing what we do. We have our values. We have our passion. We have the things that give us energy. We have our reason for leading in head, which we'll get to in a future webinar. All of those things feed into the lily pond that is our organization's culture. And I find it a really helpful way of thinking about leading in heart. So we have a question for you. Thinking about the lily pond, thinking about the motivational roots and the emotional ground, what do you do to stay aware of your team's personal priorities, their motivations, and their aspirations as an organization? I've already given the example that I would have given, Angela, if you asked me the question. What I do? I've talked about checking in versus checking up. But what else might there be? How else might you connect with people on a human-to-human level within your team or beyond your team?
I think it's a good opportunity now to get the team to reflect on how it's been over the last 18 months, because a lot of people have, just stopped and gone, wait a minute, why was I doing what I was doing 18 months ago? People's lives have changed personally and from a work point of view. So people are saying, why did I used to commute 90 minutes into London and 90 minutes back again every day? I'm now getting to spend more time with my children. Or what is it about my job that I enjoy? So if people are working differently now, it could be the bits that they used to enjoy, they're not enjoying as much anymore. So it's really delving deeper and just getting people to think about it, because they might not even know. So helping them to understand what's motivating them now and what's frustrating them now is really key, because the world's shifted. So people's mindsets have shifted, and it's good to just help people to stop and think.
Absolutely. And we've had a couple of comments come in. So I'm connected with team members on social media, which helps us to understand each other more and become more connected. And this person says it might not work for everyone, but it works for us. There is no universal, because every culture in an organization and every leader's style and every team dynamic is different. But connecting on social media could be a way of deepening those relationships. Seeking to understand personal values and drivers, what gives them energy, what depletes their energy. Absolutely, that's another great example. And just on this reflect, I'm just reflecting more on what Angela and I have talked about there about check-ins versus check-ups and seeking to connect on that deeper level. Just one watch out there, I think, is if you're shifting from being a leader who has rigorously led in head all of these years and been very focused on tasks in hand, and you're deciding, now I need to become more empathic, I need to seek to deeply understand my team and all of this. Well, it might shock the life out of them if you suddenly start asking them about their personal lives. So, you know, you may want to take a gentle approach to adjusting this, or you may want to signal. Signaling is a really important leadership skill that we talk about a lot in the modules on this. It's about saying, you know, this is the direction we're taking now. This is what I'm going to do. So rather than just doing it, share with them, ask them if they've got any concerns about what you're talking about doing, invite their contributions, so that when you do then say, you know, how's your family? They're not sort of bowled over and confused by the different person who's now who they're now encountering. You know, just
interrogated.
yeah, exactly, wondering what on earth is going on. So just bear that in mind. If you are you know, adapting your style, your leadership style, do it in a way that isn't a transformation overnight, but or if it is going to be a transformation, tell people that's what you're doing. Tell them about Leadership 4.0 so that they understand what you're trying and what you're experimenting with. There's another comment come in. Shifting from egocentric to authentic centric. Each human being should be treated as unique and individual. Yeah, I like that language. That's interesting. And we've invested in softer learning for our team, online yoga, mindfulness sessions, and appointed a social secretary, which we call our fun ambassador.
Oh,
that's great. I love that. Yeah. So that's thinking about how your leadership plays into the wider culture in the organization as well. Great. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. So look, we've talked a lot about leading in head and leading in heart. And I know in a moment, Angela, you're going to talk to us about how they play together. But a comment came in earlier, which I've been saving up for just this moment. Someone has said that they did the leadership scorecard and their scores were almost equal in terms of head and heart. And she also said, when I was talking about color insights, she said that her insights are pretty evenly spread across all 4 colors. So there you go. That's a really good example of how actually you can be this sort of holistic leader, leading in head, leading in heart. But if your scores when you do the scorecard indicate that you're one way or another, that's absolutely fine too, because there are skills and capabilities that you can develop to boost your leading in head or boost your leading in heart, and we're leading in heart, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But Angela, over to you to talk more about the convergence of these two.
That is absolutely key, that that both are so important. And the thing is, even if you're more head than heart, doesn't mean you're actually an agile thinker, and you know, doesn't mean you're going to get around the Arctic Circle. They both need developing. You know, you can be brilliant at both of them. It's just useful to know where you're initially coming from, because again, that's probably where you go in times of stress as well, which we've all enjoyed over the last 18 months. Because sometimes you'll see, why am I not clicking with that person? Why is my communication not landing? So it could be because you're doing too much of one and not the other. So I've had a look at, you know, times when you might need to dial one or the other up, because people say to us, well, how do you know which one we should be using right now? So some scenarios where you actually might need to dial up the leading in heart are you clear on your strategy, your priorities, where your direction's going, but actually the team's not that engaged? In which case, you know, brilliant, just park that and focus on spending time with your team and what they need from you right now. It could be you're making decisions at lightning speed, which a lot of us are having to do at the moment. But are you involving your team at the right points? Or are they sort of finding out by accident that you've just changed direction and not told them? In which case, you know, again, it's worth investing the time. Or at least if you've made the decision, at least go and tell them so that they know that you've now changed direction. This third one is a really common one that we hear, is about praising and criticizing without seeing how it lands. So some people will actually say, but I really said they'd done a good job on that, but didn't bother to see whether the way they'd phrased it had really landed. And we were talking about this yesterday, weren't we, Joe? That you'd praised me in a way I liked, and I said, if you'd said to me, I can see you spent a lot of time on that, my brain would automatically go to, I'm not interested in how much effort I put in. It's was the result good? That's what I
Exactly.
want to
Yeah.
know.
I'm reminded of that classic kind of coaching and line management trick, which is sometimes affectionately called the shit sandwich. I'll have to bleep that out when I do the edit for this. But it's this notion that you tell someone something positive about what they've done, then you tell them the massive amount of negative things that you've got, a big list of stuff that you're criticizing them for, and then you tell them something good at the end. And the truth is, we can all see through that these days. And I think there's a certain authenticity where you do need to give people the feedback, whether it's positive or negative, the feedback needs to be given. And actually, there's ways of doing it, and there's the right way of doing it, which kind of gives people a sense of enablement. So, if I need to give someone feedback that isn't positive, I'll often say to them, right, so here's my feedback. Now let's work out together how we're going to solve this, so that how we can get to the right result. But actually, the important thing, as Angela has said, is it's about looking at watching and observing how your feedback is landing with that person, because there's no use in giving feedback that doesn't land well. It just doesn't add value. You may feel like you've dispensed your job, but actually, as leaders, we're not about doing our task. We're about getting the thing done that we need to do, getting to that end point, getting to Vancouver, if it's even on the coast.
Yeah, and this is where the profiling we do on the module really helps. So you can think about what is it your teams need to hear from you. Oh, and this is the classic. So busy, you've cancelled your one-to-ones with your team. How often do we hear that from team members? It every so often is fine, but the number of team members who've said, I thought we were supposed to have more time now. We're not commuting, and I still haven't had a one-to-one with my manager for 4 months. I mean, if there's one thing that encourage leaders to do is keep checking in with your teams.
Absolutely.
It's just incredible how much we've heard that over the last 18 months.
Yeah, absolutely. So Angela, shall I pick up on why you may need to dial up leading?
Yeah, go for it.
So I guess when your team are happy and engaged, you can feel like you're doing a good job as a leader. But if they're not clear on where they're going, then, well, they can be as happy and engaged as you like, but they're not going to be delivering results for the business. And I think this is something that has really arisen as a potential challenge in COVID times when people are working from home. It's been a challenge, and it's also been a concern. And sometimes it's been an unfounded concern. This notion that if you can't see people, then you don't know what they're doing. You don't know if they're working well and effectively. Well, actually, as 4.0 leaders, you will know that your people are working well in an ideal situation, because you'll know that they're happy and engaged because you're leading in heart and you're checking up on them regularly. But you also know from checkups and check-ins that they are clear on where they're heading. And when you have both of those pieces in place, then you know that your team is going to be delivering results. Another time you might need to focus on dialing up leading in head is if you're putting off making those difficult decisions. So depending on what kind of leader you are, a difficult decision might be, it might be a restructure. That's a big, difficult decision that has to be made. At the other side of the spectrum, a difficult decision might be to do with changing a piece of software that you're using in your team. Those sorts of decisions that have an impact on other people are often hard for us to make. And they're often hard for us to make because we're actually operating maybe more leading in heart than we should be. There's a concept in psychometrics around an overdone strength. And I think when you're putting off making an unpopular decision, it's often because you're focusing so much on how it's going to impact on the people around you, and not enough on the short and the long-term results for the business and for your team. And particularly thinking in the long term, are you putting off this decision to protect yourself from short-term pain, but actually there's a long-term gain? And I think if you think of it in those terms, then you're leading in head, and you dial that up a little bit. You don't lose the leading in heart part, and you do it in a way that takes account of the pain that people might feel, but actually you've still made the decision. And ultimately that's what needs to be done when you're moving at pace and working agilely and have a direction that you need to go in. And it's similar to that, but slightly different. when you resist changing course, even though the facts have changed. Now, I actually hate the phrase that's used in politics when politicians are criticized for making a U-turn, especially over the last 12 to 15 months. Let's face it, the facts have changed on a day-to-day basis, and yet we criticize our leaders when they change direction because the facts have changed. And I don't want to get on a soapbox about it, but I actually admire leaders who make a U-turn because they're making U-turns because the facts have changed. So they are leading ahead. And actually in your teams, you would be doing the right thing if you changed your course because you were leading ahead. You just need to do it in a way that brings your team with you. So again, you need to dial up head in order to make that decision to change course, but you need to keep your heart element there so that you do it in a way that brings the team with you. And finally, and there are many, many more, of course, there are many more times when you would need to dial up head or dial up heart. But the final one that we've put on this list is you're always fighting fires. And this is really about focusing too much on the short term. And it may feel that you simply cannot rise above the parapets and look to the future. But if you can, but there are ways that you can. Believe me, there are ways that you can. And we talk about this a lot in the module. We talk about time management, about delegating, about working together with your team, about identifying priorities. All of these things are traits of good leadership in head. And they're things that you can do because as a leader, you have to look beyond the fires that you think you need to fight right here and right now. You have to keep an eye on the long game and keep a focus on the future.
I think there are some tips on the scorecard report, aren't there, Joe?
Yes, there are. And I'm going to introduce that now. Thank you, Angela. So we have developed, and I know a number of people on this call have actually done this already, so that's absolutely fantastic. But we have developed a scorecard, which is a self-completion scorecard. It's completely free. I've just put the link to it in the chat box. It's completely free to use. It takes what, about 5 minutes to complete, I think. Maybe if you put a bit more thought into the responses, it'll take you slightly longer. There's about 25 to 30 questions on there. And they ask about different elements, different aspects of the 5 practices of Leadership 4.0. And then it'll send you an email with a personalized report direct to your inbox. And that will give you your scores in each of these categories. They're entirely personal, they're entirely just for you. And it'll help you see where you have perhaps natural strengths or where you've already been doing some development in that area. And it'll show you where you need to perhaps work on. I know my scorecard comes out very, very heavily in leading in head and very, very poorly in leading in health at the moment. And that's probably because I'm in the middle of moving house. So, you know, those of you who joined the webinar last week will have seen that I was in the middle of traveling. I was in a car. So, you know, that's the nature of my life at the moment. But these scores are not those like a psychometric would tell you, and the idea is that it never changes. The whole point of this scorecard is so that you can work on and improve your scores. So if you do something and you work on your scores, feel free to come back to the scorecard in a few months' time and see if you've improved in the category that you're working on. So that's us. That's the leadership in the balance, using head and using heart. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. Do complete that scorecard. There's also more webinars coming up. There's one next week, one the week after, and then one 2 weeks after that. So I'll put a link to our website into the I'll put a link to our website into the box here, into the chat box, so that you can register. Sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once here. There you go. The link is now in the chat box. Feel free to register for the remaining upcoming webinars. I'll also be putting probably tomorrow the recording of this webinar on that webpage as well. So, and you can catch the previous one on there. So do take a look at that. But just from me, thank you so much, Angela, for everything you brought to this webinar today. And thanks to everyone for contributing to the chats. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I wish you all a great afternoon.
Thanks, Joe.